Widespread unrest, killings and arrests in Iran during protests sparked by a collapse in the local currency. The leadership says it will listen to demonstrators, but rioters face the death penalty as the US warns against the crackdown. How volatile is the situation? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. 2 weeks of widespread demonstrations have shaken Iran, with reports of hundreds killed, both anti-government protesters and security forces. The scale of the unrest has been driven by a collapse in the local currency. Making ends meet has become an even bigger struggle for more and more people in a country already under pressure from international sanctions. While the Iranian president has promised to listen to protesters, the Attorney General has warned those involved in the violence could face execution. The US President Donald Trump has threatened military strikes if civilians are killed, with Iran warning it will hit back if attacked. So, how volatile is the situation? Can Iran's leadership contain the wave of protests? And are there wider consequences if instability in Iran worsens? We'll talk to our panel of guests in a moment, but first this report from Alexandra Byers.
Defiance, burning bright across Iran. 2 weeks of demonstrations against soaring inflation and a plunging currency have spiraled into the worst unrest the country has seen in 3 years. Anti-government protests began in the capital and spread to dozens of other towns and cities, including Qom, Iran's second holiest city, and Mashhad, the birthplace of the supreme leader. A crackdown by security forces followed. Most internet and telecommunications services have been cut since Thursday. The Attorney General is warning anyone involved in the protests could face the death penalty. Dozens of civilians and security officials have reportedly been killed. Rights groups say more than 2,500 people have been arrested. Iran's supreme leader accuses them of acting on behalf of the US president.
He claims to be on the side of the Iranian people. He is irresponsible. He does not care about civilians. Those protesters could believe him. They burn waste bins just to please him.
Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to intervene and warned Tehran not to use force against demonstrators, or the US will hit Iran where it hurts. The government says it will strike Israel and American bases in the region if the US attacks. The defiance shown at rallies, despite threats of severe consequences, reflects the extent of the discontent, according to one Iranian academic.
Demonstrations were held because of the worsening of the economic situation in the country, and it's understandable majority of Iranians were frustrated with the worsening of their economics. But with the events turning into more sort of violent developments, demonstrations started shrinking by the day. So Thursday was really one of the scariest days in Iran, including in Tehran. But the past 2 days, we saw the shrinking of those events.
Some in the crowds have been chanting, "Down with the dictator, long live the Shah," referring to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the pro-Western leader toppled in the 1979 revolution. His exiled son has been encouraging the protesters from the US, though it's unclear whether he has significant support.
The world today stands with your national revolution and admires your courage. Do not abandon the streets. My heart is with you. I know that I will soon be by your side.
The unrest comes 7 months after Israel and the US attacked Iran, which some believe had a unifying effect, helping the government. But Iran's leadership now faces more serious pressure, this time from within. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's try and make sense of all of this with today's guests, and we're being joined from here in Doha by Mehran Kamrava. He's the head of Iranian studies at the Arab Center for Policy Studies and Research. In London, Roxane Farmanfarmaian, a professor of modern Middle East politics at the University of Cambridge. And in Washington, D.C., Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us at what seems to be a pretty important moment in Iran. So, Trita, let me start with you. We've had protests before. 1999, 2009, 2017, 2019, most recently 2022. I've probably not got the full list there. And in each case, the protests were either squashed by the government forces or they petered out. Is it different this time?
It certainly appears different today for a variety of reasons. And one of them is the weakness of the Iranian system as a whole compared to previous instances. This is right now a much, much weaker economic situation, a much worse geopolitical circumstance that Iran is facing. Dissent within the system itself is clearly at a different level. But then you also have a different appearance of the protesters. These are protests that are taking place at night. I think it's important to note that, whereas all of the previous protests from 2022, 2009 primarily took place during the day. It's much more difficult to be able to assess the size. It's much more difficult to be able to really be able to discern what is happening. It also gives protection for those within the protest, which may be a very small minority who wants to use violence, who have used violence in terms of burning down fire stations and other things. So that in of itself, I think, is notable. But also the demands are very, very different. In 2009, it was a demand for making sure that the election results actually were upheld and not cheating in the elections. 2022, they wanted a complete overthrow of the system. This time around, we've seen how rather quickly it's gone from calls for economic accountability to not only regime change, but also chants in favor of the son of the former Shah at levels that we've never seen before. It's not necessarily widespread throughout the entire country, but at levels that have not been seen before.
Roxane, Trita there talked about the fact it's taking place at night. The other thing that's meaning we're pretty dark to what's going on is that they've shut down the phone lines, they've shut down the internet. So we really do not have the sort of information we would like to assess. I mean, Al Jazeera has a team on the ground, but to assess it nationwide in Iran, what is your assessment? How dangerous is this for the Iranian government?
Well, I think there are a couple of other elements, too, that are different. One is that the army has come out over the last 24 hours proclaiming that it is supporting the government and it will protect parts of the strategic infrastructure of Iran. That is new because in the past, the army has not been part of the security services declarations against the protesters. So we're seeing absolutely no division inside the government itself. We're seeing that it's a very strong actor in the face of these protests, even though it is definitely weaker. I agree with Trita on that, and I think that is an important element here because I think the government does not want to be seen as weakened by these protesters and protests because they are concerned about the threat that both Israel and the United States have made to go in and attack. So they would like to show that they're very strong. I think the blackout is partially to ensure that public images of a crackdown do not surface as easily, and I do see that a crackdown is imminent.
Mehran, I mean, some of the reports are suggesting that these protests are taking place absolutely everywhere, all 31 provinces of Iran. I've seen quotes that this is the largest protest since 1979. Do you think this is the most dangerous moment for the Islamic Republic since 1979?
Well, we've seen a number of instances in the past several years, as you yourself mentioned, where the Islamic Republic has been faced with serious difficulty and serious crisis. Whether or not this is the most serious crisis, I think we'll find out over the next week or so if the protests continue. And if as assumptions are, they grow in intensity and in scale. We don't really know the size of the protests. We know that they've taken a turn for being violent, and we've seen images of buildings and cars being set on fire. And so I don't know. I think the space to watch really is the behavior, as Roxana just mentioned, the behavior of the security forces. And so far, we've seen no indication whatsoever that the security forces are anything other than supporting the state and are getting ready to clamp down on the protesters. So I don't know if this is the most serious crisis the state has faced, but certainly as they grow in intensity and in scope, I think they become increasingly more difficult to contain as the population becomes bolder.
Trita, you've all said there's lots we don't know here, but what we do know is the spark and the initial cause for this, which is the economy, the appalling state of the economy. I think it's fair to describe it as that. The currency has completely collapsed. The inflation is at a very high level, over 40%. The reasons, the international sanctions are crippling, the mismanagement, the corruption. The problem for the authorities, though, given that's the backdrop, there's no easy fix, is there? There's no way they can deal with this overnight.
Certainly not. And a big reason as to why the currency is dropping is because of attacks against the currency while the government is incapable of defending it, mindful of the fact that sanctions, financial sanctions imposed by the United States, has prevented the government from being able to access its funds in other countries up to $100 billion. Things that they could use in order to be able to defend the currency no longer is at their disposal. So these factors have really put the situations of the government in a place that even if they crack down very, very violently, and there are good reasons to believe that that is exactly what is taking place right now, it doesn't matter in the longer run unless they manage to make some sort of arrangement with the United States, get to some sort of a deal in which sanctions are lifted. So we've, I think, reached the point in which the space between the United States and Iran, in which they can just either ignore it and just continue with the status quo, simply doesn't exist any longer. Something has to give on this matter.
Mehran, I mean, the protesters we've got here come from a very broad base, it seems to me. You've got young, unemployed, you've got the merchant class, the shopkeepers, you've got middle class, you've got students. Do you see echoes of that sort of very broad coalition of 1979?
No doubt, yes. And they're all united in the erosion of their purchasing power, their economic abilities. And so that's why it cuts across classes. And one of the interesting things we saw was that the protests started in smaller cities, but now they've grown into much bigger cities, including Mashhad, Esfahan, Shiraz, and most notably Tehran, as the pictures we're seeing now demonstrate. And so what we're seeing is that the extent of economic difficulties is so widespread, cuts across different generations, everyone from the young high school and college graduates who cannot get jobs, all the way to retirees whose purchasing power has completely eroded and whose life savings have disappeared and dissipated. So what we're seeing is a national and cross-generational alliance of people who are simply fed up with domestic political circumstances and with their current predicament. Are they united in a vision of the future of Iran? That's an open question, and I think the answer so far is no. Revolutionary circumstances are among those where everyone gets united in not wanting the present, but not necessarily knowing what they want for the future.
Roxane, can we look at what factors might turn this uprising into a revolution and then potentially into a revolution that leads to political change? I was thinking about this and I wrote down a list. Tell me if I've left anything out. A common cause, they seem to have that. A critical mass of protesters, they seem to have that. Sustained protests, they seem to have that. And then I stumbled on this last one, and you already mentioned it, the security forces and the elites, either showing apathy in terms of opposing the protests or actually defecting. That is what we're missing, is it not?
Yes, I would add one more important thing. When I was in Iran during the revolution, one of the key players was the oil fields and the oil industry who went on strike. And I have not heard anything about the oil industry or even the Abadan area being in among the list of those being that are seeing protests. That's the economic lifeline to the regime. And until they actually go on strike, I think we're missing a key component. Another important thing is that this regime, although it is roundly hated, and hate is very important by those protesters, the protesters themselves, as far as we know, are not a cohesive opposition in any way. And a protest that actually translates into a revolution needs some kind of organized opposition of some kind. And it has been not by chance, but a strategy of this government to ensure that no organized opposition or networks really exist inside Iran. So I think that is a significant lack before this can translate into a movement that can actually topple a deeply institutionalized government. And the final thing that I would say is I think what we saw after the attack by Israel and the United States during the 12-day war was a country that did actually, the people came together in a very nationalistic way to say they did not want outside intervention. Now, we have heard many people, some within the intellectual elite, including Shirin Ebadi, the Nobel laureate, calling for the United States to intervene. But what we are not seeing is coverage, which is very real, of the number of supporters of this regime. And I think there are demonstrations pro-regime that we're not seeing. And I also think that it's important to keep in mind that although there's a vast number of people that are hitting the streets, this is a country of 88 million people, and we're seeing demonstrations still in the hundreds of thousands. During the revolution, there were millions.
Trita, you heard Roxane there talk about how cohesive the protesters were. How cohesive and loyal are the security forces? Now, I know this is a complex question and we don't have time for a very long answer. I'm sure you could write me a very long essay on it. But you have the Revolutionary Guards, you have the volunteer militia, the Basij, and you have the army. Which of those is most likely, if any of those, to splinter, to waver?
What we've seen before, as I think was mentioned, by Roxane, is that in the past, you have had statements by the army saying that they're staying out of what they consider to be internal affairs. What we're seeing now, however, is that this is not considered to be an internal affair. There is a very widespread view within the system, within the country, that this is being completely coordinated with the United States and Israel, that this, what they call this, is the beginning of the next phase of the 12-day war. The 12-day war never ended. It was a ceasefire, and the Israelis have been very, very clear that they want to restart the war. Netanyahu was here in Mar-a-Lago in New York, in the United States, on December 29th, with the agenda of pushing Trump to agree to another round of war. How that would start, etc., of course, was something that was unknown. But the perception is that this is the start of that instead of the last time having a war in which the Israelis hope would spark protests, which never happened, this time around, have it start with protest, whether they actually played a role in starting the protest or not is a different story. But they themselves, the Israelis, claim that they are playing a role right now in sustaining the protest and doing so from the perception of Tehran is they're doing it in order to soften the ground before another attack occurs. And I think that's a key reason as to why the army has taken a different position, because they see this as an external national security threat.
Mehran, the chants of the protesters, yes, death to the supreme leader. Many of them are chanting that. They're also chanting, long live the Shah. Now, help me with this one, because in the past, when I've spoken to people inside Iran, people outside Iran, the Iran observers I trust, and includes members of this panel, have told me that the Shah and the royal family, the monarchists, don't really have any support inside Iran. What do we make of it, the fact that the Shah, the name of the Shah, king in Iran, keeps being mentioned? Is this because the Shah's son, who's been in exile for very many years, is one of the only figures with name recognition? Is it because it's the most offensive thing you can shout to the security forces? You know it's going to rile them. Or has something changed among those people who don't remember 1979? Is there growing support?
Well, first of all, it's human nature to long for the good old days. And given the abject failures of the Islamic Republic, many in the population kind of reminisce about the good old days, having forgotten that there was a mass-based revolution in 1978-79. But your informants, James, are absolutely right. So far, the monarchy has not really had any meaningful support inside the country. The social base doesn't simply exist for the monarchy and support basis, except for many in the Iranian diaspora outside of Iran, that again were in one way or another beneficiaries of the former regime or have been hurt by the current regime. But I think what's also important is what you mentioned, which is brand name recognition. By virtue of having destroyed or marginalized all of its opposition forces, the Islamic Republic has managed to really destroy any organized groups. And so the only one by default that's standing is Reza Pahlavi. And so he's got brand name recognition, he's got massive Israeli support, and he's got American support, and a very wealthy network of Iranians in the United States and elsewhere in Europe.
Okay, let me get Roxane to pick that up. Reza Pahlavi, son of an autocratic dictator, lived a playboy life in his youth, lives in exile outside Washington, D.C., has never held down a job other than being his father's son. Is he the right man with the right skills to run Iran?
I would definitely agree with Mehran. I think the problem that he's going to run into very rapidly is he's got no ground game. He's got no organization on the ground whatsoever. So he's taken the opportunity to announce that he thinks demonstrations should take place in the evening, and so now is taking credit for this particular format. But I think the problem we've all addressed over time is that he doesn't have, even in the United States or in the larger European picture, a vision and a group that has developed a plan for the next stages. And so he is, unfortunately, what I think we would consider a lightweight, and simply does not enjoy the confidence of those that recognize what it takes to move in to create a next stage without creating instead the elements of a civil war.
And Trita, President Trump has so far not met Reza Pahlavi, which is interesting. President Trump has said, though, with regard to the protests, if protesters are killed, the US will act. Well, protesters have been killed. He says he's locked and loaded, means he's ready to fire off some sort of mission. What do you think are the options that President Trump might be considering? And do you think the US are worried that if they do something, it could backfire horribly?
I think we have to keep in mind that Trump just came out of a very successful Venezuelan military operation that I think has brought about a degree of euphoria in the White House and has dramatically skewed his risk and cost-benefit assessments. And as a result, is looking at a potential intervention in Iran through a very, very rosy perspective compared to what I think he should be. And this is, of course, in addition to tremendous amount of pressure that is being put on him from the Israeli side, from pro-Israeli members of the U.S. Senate, etc., who believe that this is the opportunity for the United States to perhaps do very little, but take credit for a potential downfall of the Iranian regime. I do think that he is serious when he's making these threats. The reason why he hasn't acted yet is because the U.S. doesn't have the assets in place yet. But there appears to be signs that assets are being moved towards the region. I think Trump is under the impression that the Iranians are so weak that either he can simply through threats be able to get them to cave or collapse, or with some military action that most likely in the early phases would be a similarity to what the Israelis did in the 12-day war in June, which is to go after heads of the military, heads of the political establishment, and try to see if a quick decapitation campaign can resolve the problem. The risk, of course, is that a power vacuum will not likely be filled by democracy-oriented human rights activists, but rather that there will be a significant instability, perhaps movements in some of the border areas for seceding from Iran, ultimate chaos. From a U.S. standpoint, I think Trump recognized that that is not in the U.S.'s interest. That is, however, something
let me bring in
Mehran,
if I can, Trita. In terms of the region, Iran has said that if the US launches an attack, it is going to consider all US bases and ships in the region a legitimate target. You, like me, live in Doha. We remember what happened here when Iran struck Doha last year. I mean, are you worried about a regional knock-on to all of this?
For the first time, James, I am actually, because as Trita just mentioned, it does appear as if Trump wants to attack Iran. And if it does, I think the Iranians have no option, the Revolutionary Guards in particular, but to strike back. And they're not going to strike at Kansas or Texas or Oklahoma. It's America's regional presence that will be a potential target for the Iranians.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mehran, and thanks to all of our guests, Mehran Kamrava, Roxane Farmanfarmaian, and Trita Parsi. Stay tuned to Al Jazeera. Our teams on the ground in Iran will give you the latest with further analysis at aljazeera.com. We'd like to hear from you too. Post your comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can use X. There, look for @AJ Inside Story. For now, from the team here in Doha and me, James Bays, stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.